Hi everyone, it's Gary Nicholson here for the Mountain Weather Information Service. This is your Planning Outlook video on Friday the 1st of February. Now things are looking a bit more messy as we go into the first 10 days of February. We're seeing the wind coming in from the Atlantic more commonly. Generally we'll still see a lot of cold air in place with much mountain terrain staying frozen, but just some cycles of freeze and thaw, particularly across England and Wales through the next week ahead. Precipitation frequent, we're seeing a mix of rain, often snow on the mountain, so some further accumulations are looking likely. Let's start off by setting the scene with temperatures, and this is the familiar 850 millibar chart. Currently, due to the pressure patterns and the temperatures that are around the 850 millibar level, is a bit higher than it's been just recently, so nearer to around 4,500 feet, say 1,400 metres in the atmosphere, but we can still take the steer for the general temperatures on the highest tops. This is through Saturday, and we've still got cold air in place at this stage, and it stays that way as we head on into Sunday. Less cold air edges in from the Atlantic, but essentially mountain terrain is staying at sub-zero. A little bit of thawing on lower slopes through this stage. Sunday onwards into Monday keeps the generally cold air in place. It's not the deep cold that maybe has been around in some recent days, but again it stays sub-zero on most of the higher mountains. Now things change as we go onwards into Tuesday as a warm front comes in from the Atlantic, and temporarily there may well be a thaw even towards higher slopes as temperatures lift toward or just above freezing point even on the highest tops. Now that's fairly temporary because by the time we go through into Tuesday night and Wednesday, timing uncertain, but around that time a cold front comes back eastwards and chillier air comes around off the North Atlantic once again and puts the mountains essentially back below freezing, particularly in Scotland. England and Wales might still see a bit of freeze and thaw in the later part of the week, but I suspect again for a few days we're back below freezing, even down to say 500 or 600 metres at times. And that's more or less where we go toward the end of the week. Let's take you through the synoptic charts, and this is starting off with the Saturday, and it's a fine day for many places. The northerly wind is cold, there'll be some snow showers focused on northern Scotland and a few draped around eastern and western coasts, but down the spine of the country from the Central Highlands to the Pennines it's dry with sunshine for a good part of the day. A ridge of high pressure topples its way eastwards into Sunday, but a further front comes in from the Atlantic. An area of low pressure is towards the north. This front will make erratic progress eastwards, generally giving a zone of snow, maybe persistent over a few hours, passing east across much of Scotland, across into northern England too. Maybe not much on that front for Wales, but still some snow flurries are possible here for a time. Notice that we've got low pressure further west of Ireland over the Atlantic. That will be making quick progress in as we go through into Monday. Some uncertainty on the exact track of where that rather broad centre of low pressure goes. It could be a bit further south than this, and if it is, we need to watch for more extensive snowfall, maybe even as far south as northern England from the wraparound of a front. The basic idea of the risk of a spell of gales, on this chart it would be focused more on northern England and Wales, lighter winds in the centre of the low for Scotland. A period of persistent snow, turning to rain for a time maybe on lower slopes, passes eastwards, followed by clusters of showers coming in on a westerly wind. Watch your detail and timing basically at this stage. Confidence of absolute precision is quite low in the current setup. Into Tuesday, and we're seeing milder air trying to come in from the Atlantic as we mentioned, as the wind flow is turning southwesterly, so freezing levels tending to rise. It may take quite a while for that to happen. The cold air is still in place across much of the country at this stage. So eventually rain and drizzle coming in, preceded by some snow flurries probably, but I think temperatures will rise as Tuesday daytime goes on, so that by the end of the day, most likely you're near or maybe even just above freezing point on many of even the higher tops. Fronts pass their way eastwards through into Wednesday. Again, uncertainty of absolute detail by this stage, but it puts us back into cooler air behind a cold front, and it's a showery regime that follows from the Atlantic, with some snow and some hail coming down back to lower slopes and the risk of some heavy bursts with thunder around the coasts in the west. The wind again varied, maybe light for a time, but squally winds where showers do develop. Just to take a look at the bigger picture then for the week as a whole, and this chart I'm using is what's called an operational run of the model, and essentially that's the best guess of any one particular computer model. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the most accurate, as it turns out. We often use what's called ensemble forecasting, which is where you use several runs of the same model with slightly different parameters to get a more generalized picture, but the operational run can often just try and pick out some detail which an ensemble would not resolve. With that in mind, this is starting off on Monday. We're going to go forwards in 24-hour steps, and it's a complicated picture, as you can see, with little areas of low pressure dotted around the North Atlantic. And we've got some very cold air that's coming off the eastern side of North America. Some of this is what's left, effectively, of the so-called polar vortex, which will become heavily modified as it moves out over the North Atlantic, but it's some of the inherent characteristics of that very cold air. Running ahead of that will be a push of milder air that it picks up from the mid-Atlantic and pushes in our direction first. That's around Tuesday. The area of low pressure then that follows tries to edge towards us as we go through towards Wednesday with further fronts coming in. The cold, unstable air at this stage is still further out over the North Atlantic. As that gets closer towards us, though, into the second half of the week, it gives the greater chance for a much more showery regime of unstable air that's coming in with hail and thunder across the northern and western parts of the British Isles, and picked up on its southern side may well be little smaller areas of low pressure. Now, this is where the detail becomes very tricky, and we can't get the guaranteed answer to this at this stage. But if these secondary areas of low pressure shown here do develop in the second half of the week, then they could zip across the southern half of the British Isles, even into northern France, as quite potent storm systems if they do materialise as shown here. The jet stream is being fired up at the moment, basically, by the cold and warm air contrast that will exist over the North Atlantic in these days ahead, so it's always a time where developmental systems can really get going. Either way, I think Scotland and Northern England leans towards staying under a colder air mass. We may see these little areas of low pressure scoot across the southern half of the country, with the temperatures varying quite quickly, but the indications would always just keep the northern half of Britain under much colder air, and that's heading towards next weekend, keeping things fairly showery and keeping the mountains maybe often below freezing, so any of the showers often falling to lower levels as snow or some hail. So hopefully you can follow the logic of that. A lot of complexity going on then in this 10-day period ahead. Keep an eye on the latest forecast then that we update every day on our website, and we'll update the video for you again early in the new week. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.